Champa. I have scored 644 in the NEET UG 2024 examination, and in this video I'll be discussing about the chapter Breathing and Exchange of Gases. It's the beginning of a series which is meant for your revision, in which I will declutter the different chapters into the different topics and talk about what should be the approach to learn different chapters and what are the underrated topics which students tend to overlook, or what are the lines which are very important and they might pop up as your statement based questions, because because these statement based questions can be picked up anywhere from your NCERT, and you don't even know, sometimes you ignore the line. So the line by line reading of NCERT is very important. You can use this series for your revision as well, because as I go through the video, you would get to know that if you are about to revise the chapter, or if you are about to write down the short notes of any chapter, what you can do is that you can easily know that these are the topics which you need to focus on, which you need to throw light on, right? So let's start off without any delay. Firstly, I'll be discussing about the underrated topics. First one, introduction. Now, it may not be as of like any broad topic for the chapter, but we tend to ignore the introduction. Introduction has got some important lines, especially the line which defines respiration. That is important, because the way it's written, it can pop out as any statement based questions. It defines breathing and says that it's commonly known as respiration. Now, when you are like, you haven't, suppose, read this line before, and you all of a sudden get introduced to this line, what's going to happen is that in the exam, you would spend a few minutes thinking about whether it's right or wrong, whether you should mention, because respiration we know is indeed different from breathing, but respiration includes breathing as well. But since it's a line of NCERT which mentions it like this statement has to be marked true. These kind of questions make us think a lot in the exam. We waste a lot of time, as a result of which the other questions also tend to get affected. So it's better if these important lines, or the lines which you tend to overlook, are told to you by someone, right? Now let's get on to the next one, that is exchange of gases paragraph. When I would get to the paragraph, as I'll be moving forward discussing all the paragraphs one by one, I'll be talking about it and how and why it's underrated, and how you should study, what lines you should focus on so that you do not miss out any part. And then the disorders. Now let me tell you, disorders you would definitely give a reading. It's not a thing which you guys would ignore, but you would rather give a casual reading. But for disorders, you need to focus on what is the particular cause for each disease. There are just 3 diseases discussed over here: asthma, emphysema, and the occupational disorders. But you need to know how each of these are different. People often tend to get confused. Look, when I talk about asthma, I'm just talking about, like, the causative agent is inflammation of the bronchi and bronchioles. Now, inflammation is also mentioned in occupational disorders, fibrosis. Well, this is just because of the inflammation of the alveoli, not the bronchi and the bronchioles. So do not get confused, and make proper flow charts and study the causes and the consequences of all the diseases separately. Now let's start off with respiratory organs. For that, I would like to say, make a table, right? The respiratory organs and the organisms which have the respective respiratory organs. The table is sufficient to nail this paragraph. You don't need to focus on anything else. Then we have the human respiratory system. Over here, the diagram is very important, and you need to make that entire sequence of how it goes on, like from the nose till the alveoli. What is the passage of air? You need to write about it. And then we have got other things as well, like certain information which you need to memorize. That is the position of trachea. And there are certain lines which are important. Like, I would like to mention this line, that is the function of the pleural membrane and the function of pleura. And also this one line which is very important for the statement based questions, that is the branching network of bronchi, bronchioles and alveoli comprise the lungs. It's very important for your statement based questions. And the function of pleura, pleural fluid between them, that is to reduce friction on the lung surface. This may be ignored. It's a small line towards the end of the paragraph. People tend to get impatient with those. That is why I thought about mentioning these lines for your betterment. Something over here which is very important is that you would need to understand that what part is excluded from the conducting part but is included in the respiratory part. It's just the alveoli and their ducts, remember. So even the terminal bronchioles are not included in the respiratory system. It's just the alveoli and their respective ducts. This segregation, that how these two are different and up to what the conducting part continues and what are the functions of the conducting part are very important. Functions can also come in the form of the statement based questions. Now getting to the different steps which they have talked about for respiration. Sequence. Here sequence based questions would come, like you would have all these steps, okay, in a very haphazard way, like right from A to E, and you would need to arrange these in the form of sequences. Such kind of questions are very common for the NEET UG examination. Then getting to mechanism of breathing, you cannot leave a single line out of here. Every line needs to be remembered. This line which talks about spirometer and how it's necessary for the assessment of pulmonary functions. That line is important. And what is the function of spirometer? This is the part, this is the line which many might tend to ignore. But make sure that you do it and study that part properly. Like in the diagram, they talk about how during inspiration the diaphragm is contracted and the diaphragm is relaxed and arched upwards during expiration. They can pick up small statement based questions from these small writings which are or small labelings in the diagram. So when I say the diagrams are important, it's not just for the it's not just that you somehow look at the diagram and know that which part is what and how it's marked, but also you need to get into the details of the labelings and understand. You need to go through the writings, below the diagrams. Respiratory volumes and capacities. This is the part where maximum questions of this chapter would come from. Now it may seem easy, but it'll be better if you read those, memorize those, and then write down the values 5 times. It makes a difference. Writing it 5 times helps you to remember it for a long time ahead. Now getting to the exchange of gases paragraph. There are certain points which are to be remembered. That is, the diagram is very important, especially the diagram which talks about how the exchange of gases happens. And the partial pressure table, people tend to ignore it. Even I didn't look at it till I got a question wrong from bio. Partial pressure table is indeed very important. It gives you some important data which you need to memorize. There are a few lines from here, okay, which I will need to talk about, like alveoli are the primary sites of exchange of gases. This is the first line. Now, talking about sites of exchange of gases, it's not just alveoli. We also have got tissues, right? But alveoli are the primary sites. This is what you need to circle, the word primary. And remember that in case you get such kind of statements, read through the statements properly. Are they talking just about sites of exchange of gases, or they're talking particularly about the primary site of exchange of gases? Then you need to make certain points kind of notes, that is on what conditions diffusion across membranes depend on. The 3 conditions need to be remembered, but not just in a way, just to frame your concept properly, but you also need to know that how it varies, because like if the thickness of the membrane increases, then the diffusion rate is going to decrease. So they are inversely proportional. But if the pressure or concentration gradient increases or the solubility of the gases increases, then these are good signs. Then these properties are directly proportional with the diffusion rate. This is how you need to get into the concepts. Then talking about the small details, that is how the solubility of CO2 and that of O2 vary. And there is one other important point towards the end. That's the second last line. That is the total thickness is much less than a millimeter. Often what happens is that when you read the line at the end towards the exam, you only need to remember this one number, that is 1 millimeter. But in the question, you would get what is the thickness, and there are only options: more than 1 millimeter, equal to 1 millimeter, less than 1 millimeter, or none of these. So in these kind of questions, you can get confused if your reading and revision has not been done properly, or the important lines were not written down or marked properly in your short notes. You can especially make an entire copy on short notes and write down these important lines, which you tend to ignore, but those lines maybe contain certain important data-based information which you need to memorize, or lines which you almost skipped. So this one was important. Remember, it's always less than 1 millimeter. These specifications and detailings are important always for your exams. Transport of gases. nothing but just about the percentages, but do segregate down the percentages properly. Like when I'm talking about CO2 especially, because the O2 percentage breakdown is easy, 97% and 3%. But for CO2, remember that, like you have firstly of the RDCs, and then you have bicarbonate ions and dissolved state. So total, if I'm talking about the percentage of CO2 which is carried by the plasma, it's going to be 77%. Now when you get the plasma categorized, then you can have two categories under plasma. That is firstly as the bicarbonate ions and secondly as the dissolved state. So do remember that when you're studying these percentage kind of things, you need to always know that which percentage comes under what category. Transport of oxygen, each and every line is important and the graph is important. The shape of the graph is important. How the graph is formed, of course I know teachers are going to explain it to you. Do learn it from the teachers. Well, this is standard 11th bio, just talking about like a little bit about my preparation. I didn't attend the bio classes in my drop here, especially like the 11th part I'm talking about. What I did was that I directly went to MD Sir's Umeed batch from YouTube. It's out there free on YouTube, and I did my bio from there. I had never attended a more detailed video on bio and bio teachings ever before. He explained each and every point just in that one short video, and trust me, that was all I needed. He explained and he broke down each and every topic of NCERT so brilliantly that I did not need to even open the book. Like at once I was absorbing the concepts from him. I was making the notes and I was reading the NCERT, and after that was done, after my lecture was done, I was prepared about 90% with my chapter, the reading part. Alright, now talking about transport of carbon dioxide, again, do not leave any part. And talking about this small reaction thing, always remember that at which side the reaction tends to go forward and at which side the reaction tends to go backwards. This is a tricky question, because at the exam you can get confused and you can start thinking about reassuring yourself and thinking about it. So it's better that you get your concepts cleared at once, and it's better that you focus on this. It's better that you mark it down as one of the important points, and whenever you revise, either from your notes or especially from your short notes before the test, you get to see this and you get to repeat this one line more and more number of times. And here I would like to mention one important thing. Like for the transport of oxygen, we have this line, which is the fourth line. That is, binding of oxygen with hemoglobin is partially related to the partial pressure of O2. When I talk about primary relation, that is binding of oxygen with hemoglobin is primarily related to PO2. Other factors which are there, they just have an influence over this binding, but the primary dependence is on a PO2. I guess I once got a question wrong on this topic, so I'm just making things clearer to you guys. Now getting to transport of carbon dioxide, similarly we have this thing that the binding is related to the partial pressure of CO2, of course, but partial pressure of oxygen is just a major factor which affects this binding. But the binding is directly always related to PCO2. Just the same way, the binding of oxygen to hemoglobin is also primarily related to PO2. Other factors are just going to affect it. Now for regulation of respiration, I would say that you need to go through a flow chart which you need to make. Like firstly, put down the heading, that is regulation of respiration, and then make the categories. Like first one, how the respiratory rhythmic center controls it. Then we have the Pons center. There is another center which is there in the Pons region. That is the pneumotaxic center. Okay. And then we have another one, that is receptors. Then you can write about the three categories underneath and how they also affect each other. Like we know that at the end of the day, it's all a function of the respiratory rhythmic center. But the other two factors somehow have their own influences, and the end result is always that they all are going to affect and send necessary signals to the respiratory rhythm center, and then the respiratory rhythm center would finally make the decisions on how to save us or on how to make necessary changes in the body. The last line is very important of this paragraph. That is, the role of oxygen is negligible. You would try to understand this line, that it's always the CO2 concentration, it's always the H plus concentration which affects these. Okay, but almost we do not have any role of oxygen in the regulation of respiration. Okay, it's not just respiration. in statement-based questions, there are two sources of mistakes. First, it's a personal error that you make the mistake in reading. Okay, so even though you knew the concept, just because you made the mistake in reading, okay, or you left out certain parts, left out certain words, then it can cause you problem. And the next one is that you had a fault in your concept. Okay, so these are the two kind of situations, and both of them can be ruled out by different techniques which I have mentioned earlier. Have your proper test analysis book, revise properly, alright, and also that go through your short notes properly, the important lines which you have written about or the topics which you tend to miss out. Now getting to disorders, I have already discussed about disorders before. You can learn about them again in a flowchart kind of way. Like you can start from the cause and you can end till the result or the consequence. Like for asthma, we have it like, firstly, we would have inflammation of the bronchi and the bronchioles. Then we would have difficulty in breathing or asthma, and it's going to result in wheezing. So this is how you can make the sequence-wise flowchart to understand these disorders better. Just like we have emphysema, which starts off with cigarette smoking, which is one of the causes. There may be other causes as well, but at your level you can just start off with cigarette smoking. Then you can get to make it like alveolar walls get damaged. Then the next step is that the respiratory surface gets decreased and you suffer from this deadly disease. So this entire flowchart is gonna help you remember and also break down the concepts in a very easy, suitable way. Same it goes with the occupational respiratory disorders. I have shared my notes and how I wrote these things down for my betterment. If you want to, you can definitely take help from this video and enhance your learning process. These are just made for your help. So thank you if you have reached up to this end, and in the next video of the series, we'll be discussing about the other important chapter.